I'm Dr. Bryan Wright, and this is Run to the Huddle. It is fascinating to me how much was really pulled from my life when I was growing up, and every single person can relate to this, I believe, when you have life that teaches you lessons when you're young and you begin to form these ideas around how it works, and you form these ideas around what you want to do to make sure that you don't have those negative experiences maybe that you had when you were younger. I remember being a little boy walking from the elementary school in Murtaugh, Idaho to the high school. And I had this very just compelling memory of walking with my schoolmates to get to the lunchroom, which was over by the high school. And at the time, there were some animals over in the field to the right side of the football field, and they were actually basically terrorizing another animal. And at my young age, I just wanted to kick into high gear and go help this other animal out. I didn't really know dangers very well, and I began to run over to try and rescue this other animal. And I got tackled by my schoolmates. And as I was on the ground, they were kind of laughing about it, and I don't hold any grudges about it whatsoever, but the experience was one that really shaped how I viewed the world. But I remember seeing these two animals basically end the life of this other animal while I was pinned to the ground. Now, these moments actually start to form a person's view of life, and every one of us has moments like these where you can either get bitter, you can join the club, you can actually determine what it means for you in your life. For me, this developed a certain sense of fear where I began to really say, how am I going to watch out for myself, because I wasn't strong enough to stand up to some of these stronger schoolmates, and B, how will I approach this in the future? Am I willing to risk my reputation, the way people looked at me, to help other creatures, animals or people or whatever? And so these are like ideas that started to shape how I approached everything in life. And interestingly enough, those moments plugged in how I approach things with fear. And maybe you've had fear before. Let's talk about fear for a little bit. I personally have learned over time how to look at the target that I want to go toward versus what I don't want to have in my life. Now at this stage of my life, I try to avoid the entire thought of fear altogether, and that sometimes works and other times it doesn't. The way that it works the best is when we don't look at fear as a messenger that we should avoid, but rather a messenger that we can lean into. And for a lot of people, fear, whether you got it, at your young age or it's stacked along the way, starts to shape how you make decisions in your adult life too. And perhaps you've had fear from doing something that you feel you need to have in your life. Maybe you feel like you want to start your own business, or perhaps you feel fear from, advancing in your career path, or whatever it is, fear about doing a program that you're wanting to do for your physical body. And I will tell you right now, there are different approaches to fear that I've heard from people. One is face everything and rise. Fear stands for face everything and rise, or forget everything and run. And the target here for us as we lean into this subject is, how do you face everything and rise when you have programming from your past that actually drags you backward, or it causes you to reflect in a way that makes you skittish or jumpy? Or maybe you have fear of the unknown. You don't know how you're going to start a business with zero capital or very little capital, and you don't know if you're actually going to just burn everything out on a failed venture. Well, I can share a few stories that can illustrate how we approach fear, especially when it comes to leaning into something like starting a new venture. When I was going through graduate school, I started a company that was a women's fitness center. And the way that I approached it was, I had some friends of mine who actually built a very large venture. They invested a lot of money on their very first business, and they kind of like threw the dice and risked it all on a very large venture. It was a rec center that they wanted to build. And they felt like if they just jumped in head first, that everything would work out great. And they ended up really strapping themselves down to a lifestyle that They could barely afford groceries for their kids because they were putting so much money into paying off the debt. They didn't have business experience. They didn't have mentorship. So they didn't have the know-how on what they should do for this business that was failing. And it was literally draining their lives. I actually saw the wrinkles under their eyes start to form over a period of months and years that were accelerated compared to normal people. And I interviewed these friends many times, like, what would you have done differently? And one of the things they said was, we would start smaller in terms of the initial investment, learn how business works, learn how to do all the different aspects of it, and then we would have grown into something bigger. That resonated with me. And I've always had this hunter mentality of building a business. So when I was in graduate school with that particular story in mind, I decided I would open a fitness center for people who were looking for studio fitness. And so it was a very small, modest investment, and I felt like I could be successful with it. I felt like no reason that I couldn't do it while I was going to graduate school. And I started off on that foot. The way I looked at it was, most people were buying vehicles that would cost about the same amount as the startup of this business. At the time, I didn't know what performers were. I did not understand what operations looked like. I didn't understand sales. I didn't know what job descriptions were. I really just didn't know anything. I just thought, let's go for it. Let's just start, and then let's see how it all works out. And I leaned on my own ability to create on the fly. My experience was not a lot different than my friends who had this large rec center that was failing. The exception was that I didn't have enough investment to actually cause my entire life to be under water for 5 years like theirs. I had just enough investment that it made me sick if it didn't work. So fast forward 2 years through graduate school, and this business that I started didn't make me a penny. It cost me more money than we made, and there was a lot of work that was put into it, and it just wasn't a fun venture. In fact, after I was done starting that business, I was basically finding myself praying on a daily basis, how can I actually get this thing to work? How can I actually sell it? After a time, the prayer transitioned from, how do I get this business to work, to how do I sell it so that I can get rid of the liabilities of rent, payroll, all the other things that come with the business. And fortunate for me, I was able to sell the business at break even, meaning how much I owed left is how much I sold it for. And I was able to get out from under it. And the promise I made to myself was, I am not going back into business again. It was such a miserable experience. It was like, no more of that. I fell into the same statistic that most Americans fall into, which is about 95% of businesses don't actually work after 5 years of being in business. And the question would then be so do you need to not start a business because fear is telling you that you might fail like 95% of the population? My answer to you is absolutely not. I think this is a face everything and rise type situation where fear can be the resistance to what it is that you really want to create. There's really, in my experience, two types of fear. And I've learned this as I then later on broke my promise to myself that I would in fact start a business, because my promise was not founded in any kind of virtue. It was founded in fear. So I broke that promise because the promise was not in my best interest to make. It was really in this sort of fearful place that I made it. So I started a business much later, started a company that grew to 8 figures in enterprise value, and I'm still the functioning CEO in it. And it's been amazing. It's literally transformed my life. So if fear was an indication that you should not do something, then I wouldn't have had the opportunity to build the business that I have now. It was really more of an indication of resistance, of what can I learn from the experience that I had, and what do I need to face head on that's going to help me to develop and become better. Go back to when I started this business that was successful, Wright Physical Therapy. I started that business back in 2008, and it started to be ragingly successful right out the gate. And frankly, I really didn't have the capital to start it. But I had listened to enough books and understood that I could leverage other people's money, whether it be through banks or other people, meaning friends or associates that I could find that would be interested in investing in my venture, that I was able to get just enough money from 2 investors to start Wright Physical Therapy. I had 0 capital. I had no way to do it on my own. I was scraping by month to month. I couldn't even afford my kids' diapers, honestly. It was a very scary situation. But again, I decided through this whole process to look at fear not as an indicator that I should not, but rather as resistance to something that was calling me. And so for me, my particular way of desiring what I wanted in life and what I designed in life, I was able to, again, find 2 friends that could fund just enough for my working capital. That term means the money that it would take for me to fund payroll and expenses for a period of however many months. And then I just dedicated to myself that I was going to do whatever it took to succeed, and then took off. And fortunately for me, all that work paid off, and I was able to just grow line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little, until the business was really thriving. Now, a side note to all this, I didn't just suddenly become successful in the business and everything was like better than ever. The first few years of starting that business that was successful, Wright Physical Therapy, were actually some of the hardest years of my life. So even with the success of the business, there was, late hours. There was probably 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, lack of sleep, not really a lot of time for my family. So these sort of demons, if you will, these demons of fear that say, don't start a business, you don't have any money. These demons of fear that say, don't start a business, you failed. These demons that say, you started a business, it's now succeeding, you found a way. But now here comes the tax man, here comes the problems. Suddenly your team doesn't like you for certain things. Maybe they feel like you're greedy, and all of a sudden you're like, maybe I should have listened to that fear, and I should have maybe just realized that fear was telling me something to avoid. Along the way, I found some powerful mentors that were themselves people I looked up to. People I wanted to, let's say, trade places with in the category that I looked up to them in. And I found those people used fear as a messenger, not as something to avoid or something that says you should not, but rather to embrace it and say, if I were to face my fears and I were to conquer those fears, what would the long-term view look like if I were successful? You know how sometimes you have fear, and let's just say it's like stepping up to a cliff and you're afraid that if you jump off a cliff, you might potentially hit a rock because you're not skilled at cliff jumping. That fear can be a very good indicator that you need to pause and understand that maybe that's not the best thing for you. And the other type of fear is the one that says you shouldn't start whatever it is that you want to do. You shouldn't start the marathon training. You shouldn't start the business. The best way I found to distinguish between the fear that's telling you, watch out, this is not good for you, and hey, this is a messenger that's resistance to what it is that you really need to lean into, is that thing. Close your eyes and envision your life if you were to confront that fear and overcome it. In the cliff example, I could close my eyes and I'm not going to have much better life if I confront the fear of jumping off the cliff if I all of a sudden overcome that fear. Instead, I might choose to go and choose a smaller cliff and get some skill as I grade myself up if what I'm trying to do is overcome a fear of heights. Okay, fine. But in the case of not doing something that you're called to, that you keep getting called to, you keep getting pulled to, and the fear is just stopping you, it's that resistance that stops you. I've had a mentor teach me about resistance being the one thing that is a pure signal that you need to lean more into what it is that is being resisted. So I continued with Wright Physical Therapy. I continued through the resistance. And you know what's interesting? The resistance never truly went away. In fact, the more resistance I overcame, the newer and almost in some cases bigger resistance I got. And that may actually scare a lot of people away from leaning into what it is that they want to do. But I want to make a very compelling point that has changed my life for the better. And that is, if you trade up for bigger problems, it's the surest sign of being alive. Because the only people who don't have any real problems in their life, really like in this earthly life, they're dead. And so a sure sign of life is that you have problems that you get to deal with. What really I don't want to have when it comes to fear is I don't want to have the fear that I didn't do what I could have done, that I didn't lean into what it is that I could have done. The other thing I don't want to have a fear of is I don't want to have a fear of just the same problem over and over again. Like the same fear day in, day out, like Groundhog's Day. Like here's the same thing I keep on battling day in, day out. That's when I decided through that mentor's advice that I would rather take the fear that I have, overcome it, and trade up for newer and in some cases bigger problems. So that's kind of the call to life's journey is, are you going to lean into the resistance? Are you going to lean into what is stopping you from progressing? Or are you going to fade out? We find through that process is people will either progress or digress. They're either moving forward or they're moving backward. I remember hearing Robert Herjavec from Shark Tank. I met him in person one time and he was talking to me and he said, look, Bryan, there's two types of people in the world. There are those that are too dumb to know that they're dying and those that are growing. And it's just a funny way of putting like you're not able to overcome fear by just avoiding leaning into the resistance. In fact, probably get more problems whether you like it or not, and they won't be really productive problems that guide you to a better place. They're going to be non-productive problems. They're, by and large, they might be. So for example, let's use the human body on this case. If I want to lean into marathon training and getting in the best shape of my life, there's some fear to that. There's fear of injury. There's fear of the training schedule. There's fear of pain and soreness. If I keep going as I am and eating whatever it is that's comfortable, there will be a fear of potentially some really big health issues, health risks, and maybe the fear of not being what I knew I could have been. I really like to, as we finalize some of these concepts, lean into what instead. So instead of focusing so much on fear, and how do you overcome it, what do you want instead of fear? For me, I want courage. I want courage. And then from there, I want not only courage, but I want to pair that courage with confidence. I want love and joy and peace. And I want to have those things because I'm willing to lean into uncomfortable feelings. So when you find people in your life that are willing to help you and they have tools that can help you, that's another huge part of overcoming fear and getting into courage is you surround yourself with people who have done it before and who are courageous themselves because we structurally couple with them. So to summarize, fear can be an acronym that stands for face everything and rise. It's usually a signifier that it's something that you can lean into. If you're starting with zero capital and you want to start a business, you have so many options at your disposal. Typically within partnership models, there are literally hundreds of different things you can do to break free from that. So don't allow excuses like resources not being enough to help you get to where you want to go. In fact, one of my mentors right now at this stage of life, 4 years ago, they started a company with $0 invested, zero. And they've built it to a $500 million company. 4 years. That shows and tells you that you don't need to have resources to succeed. What people need is resourcefulness and initiative. That's what they need. And they need people in their lives that can actually structurally couple with them that actually help them to succeed, which is another core summary. You can either fly high with the eagles or fly low with the egos. If you're trying to do it all alone, you're not going to succeed like when you do it with other people. Whether you're hiring and entrusting people to the process of how you're going to do it, or you're partnering with people, it is my very firm experience that to really go far, you've got to go with other people. Another big thing is you can exchange what it is that you don't want for what it is you do want. You don't want fear? Great. Don't try to push it away because what we resist persists. Instead, lean into what it is you want instead, because what we focus on expands. You'll hear me say that a lot. What we focus on expands. So if you're focused on fear, it's going to expand. If you're focused on what you want instead, courage, joy, love, peace, and contribution, that's going to expand. I guess my final message to you is take courage. Life can be hard if that's what you say in your head. If you're like, life is hard, I mean, you're creating that. If instead you say life can be challenging and bring on the challenge, it can have a completely different energy and feel and can drive forward success. So don't let fear be the acronym that says, forget everything and run. Instead, let it be face everything and rise.